He cut a piece from the man's shirt after he shot him in the head in his taxi cab in a nice San Francisco neighborhood. Then he mailed that bloody piece of fabric to a newspaper. Why? It's the question that sits at the center of the whole Zodiac mystery. It's more than just a clue. It's more than a taunt. It was a statement. It was, for him, the ultimate proof. But proof of what? Not just that he killed Paul Stine. It was proof of who he was, what he was, and the game he was playing with an entire city. To understand the shirt, you have to understand the man and the timeline. You have to see how he built up to that moment. It wasn't a random act. It was a graduation. The Zodiac started his work in the dark, on lonely roads. His first known victims were high school kids, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. They were parked on Lake Herman Road, a lover's lane. It was just before Christmas in 1968. He pulled up, shot them, and left. He didn't write a letter. He didn't call the police. He just killed and vanished. For months, it was a tragic but unsolved local murder. Nothing more. There was no Zodiac yet. There was only a shadow, a ghost who had committed a brutal, senseless act and disappeared back into the night. The silence was part of the terror. The lack of a motive, the lack of a suspect. It was a ghost story come to life. Then, 7 months later, it happened again. Another lover's lane. Blue Rock Springs Park. Darlene Farron and Michael Mageau were sitting in their car. A man pulled up, shined a light in their eyes, and started shooting. He emptied his gun into them. Darlene died. Michael somehow survived, but this time was different. The killer didn't just vanish. He picked up the phone. He called the Vallejo Police Department. The dispatcher answered, and a calm, monotone voice spoke. He said, "I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to a public park, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." That phone call was the beginning of the Zodiac persona. The silence was broken. The ghost now had a voice. He wasn't just a killer anymore. He was a communicator. He was taking credit. He was linking his crimes. He was building his own dark legend. The phone call was step 1. The letters were step 2. About a month later, 3 letters arrived at 3 different newspapers. The San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. They were all written by the same hand. And in them, the killer gave details only he could know about the 2 crime scenes. He described the ammunition he used. He described the positions of the bodies. This was his proof. He was telling the world, it was me. But he did something else, something far more sinister. He included a cipher, a puzzle made of strange symbols, and he made a demand. He told the papers to publish his cipher on their front pages. If they didn't, he would go on a killing rampage and murder a dozen people over the weekend. The city was terrified, the newspapers complied, the Zodiac had found his stage. He wasn't just a killer in the shadows anymore. He was a public figure, a monster holding the Bay Area hostage with his words and threats. The ciphers were a masterstroke of psychological terror. It wasn't just about killing. It was about intellectual dominance. He was saying, I am not just a brute. I am smarter than you. I am a puzzle master, and my crimes are part of a grand elaborate game. You are not my hunters. You are my audience. And you are my players. People across the country tried to solve the cipher. It was eventually cracked by a school teacher and his wife. The message was rambling and filled with misspellings. It talked about how much fun killing was. It said he was collecting slaves for the afterlife, and it ended with him saying he wouldn't give his name because it would slow down his collection of slaves. And he had a voice, he had a name, even if it was one he gave himself, and he had a brand, the cross-circle symbol he signed his letters with. He was a media sensation, but his proof was still just words on a page, details about the crime scene. Things a determined person might have learned other ways. It was convincing, but it wasn't physical. It wasn't tangible. Then came Lake Berryessa. This was a different kind of attack. It was in broad daylight. A young couple, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, were relaxing by the lake. A man approached them. He was wearing a strange hooded costume. It was black with the Zodiac symbol stitched on the chest. He was holding a gun. He told them he was an escaped convict and needed their car and money to get to Mexico. He seemed calm, almost nervous. He had them tie each other up. Brian thought it was just a strange robbery. But then the man put his gun away and pulled out a long knife. He stabbed Brian 6 times. He stabbed Cecilia 10 times. He walked over to their car and drew his symbol on the door with a black marker. He wrote the dates of his other attacks. Then he walked away. Before he left, he told Brian he was going to call the police. And he did. He drove to Napa and used a payphone. He spoke in that same calm, monotone voice. I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. And then he said something chillin'. I'm the one that did it. He left the phone hanging off the hook. Cecilia Shepard died from her wounds. Brian Hartnell miraculously survived. He was able to give police a description of the man. His voice, his costume. The attack at the lake was an escalation in theatricality. The costume, the symbol on the car door, the controlled, ritualistic nature of the attack. He was performing now, he was creating a character. The Zodiac wasn't just a name, it was a role he was playing. A real-life supervillain. The proof he offered this time was his own handiwork on the car door and the phone call taking credit. Again, he was linking his crimes, building his resume of terror. He was in complete control of the narrative. But he was still operating on the fringes, lonely roads, a quiet lake. He was preying on isolated couples in remote places. He was the boogeyman in the dark. The monster you worried about when you were far from the safety of the city lights. He had the Bay Area scared, but it was a specific kind of fear. A fear of the desolate, empty places. And then came Paul Stine. This changed everything. This was not a remote lover's lane. This was Presidio Heights, a wealthy, well-lit neighborhood in the heart of San Francisco. It wasn't a young couple, it was a 29-year-old cab driver. The Zodiac didn't lay a trap or wait for a victim in the dark. He got into a man's cab, he rode with him, he directed him to a specific intersection, and then he shot him in the back of the head. It was an execution, it was cold, clean, and terrifyingly urban. The Zodiac had brought his terror into the city. He was no longer a phantom of the countryside. He was now a threat to everyone, everywhere. He could be the man sitting next to you on a bus, the man walking past you on the street. The risk he took was enormous. After shooting Stine, he was seen by 3 teenagers across the street. They watched him as he moved around the front seat, wiping down the cab. They called the police. A dispatcher put out a bulletin for a black male suspect, a mistake that would haunt the investigation forever. The Zodiac, a white man, was actually stopped and questioned by police officers just a few blocks from the scene. They were looking for a black man. They saw this white man walking away, didn't think he was a suspect, and let him go. The killer had walked right through the police dragnet and simply disappeared. He had committed his most brazen murder yet, in the city, with witnesses, and he had talked to the police and walked away free. His ego must have been astronomical. He had proven he was smarter, luckier, and bolder than anyone imagined. But how could he prove that? How could he communicate the sheer audacity of this crime? His old methods wouldn't be enough, just writing a letter with details of the crime scene. That was old news. He needed something more, something undeniable, something that would make the police and the public feel his presence in a visceral, physical way. A few days later, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. It began with the usual taunt. This is the Zodiac speaking. He described the murder of the cab driver. He mocked the police for their incompetence, for letting him slip through their fingers. He talked about how they could have caught him. He even corrected them on the location of the murder. He was gloating, and then came the punchline. Taped to the letter was a small, rectangular piece of cloth. It was stiff with dried blood. The letter said, "I am the same man who did in the people in the North Bay area. To prove this, I shall state some facts which only I plus the police know. As some proof of my connection to the Stine killing, I am sending you a piece of his bloody shirt." This was it, the ultimate proof. It was not a story, it was not a detail, it was not a cipher. It was a piece of the victim, a physical relic from the moment of death. He had reached into the cab, into the middle of his own brutal act of violence, and taken a souvenir. He had cut it from Paul Stine's shirt with a knife. He had held onto it as he walked away from the scene, as he passed the police, as he made his way back to wherever he lived. He had kept this gruesome trophy, and now he was sharing it with the world. Let's break down why this was such a powerful and deliberate act. It worked on so many levels. First, it was absolute, irrefutable proof. There was no arguing with a piece of the victim's bloody shirt. The police could and did match it to the shirt Paul Stine was wearing. It instantly verified his claim. He wasn't some crank trying to take credit. He was the real deal. He had been in that cab. This act cemented his credibility as the killer. It connected the San Francisco murder to the North Bay murders in a way that was concrete and undeniable. He was building his franchise, and the bloody shirt was his seal of authenticity. But it was so much more than just verification. It was an act of supreme dominance and control. He was controlling the evidence. The police are supposed to secure a crime scene, collect all the evidence, and use it to find the killer. The Zodiac flipped that script completely. He took a piece of the evidence with him. He decided when and how it would be revealed. He was not a suspect for the police to hunt. He was the master of the investigation, feeding them clues and trophies on his own schedule, by his own rules. Sending the shirt piece was like a king throwing a scrap of meat to a dog. It was a gesture of contempt. He was saying, "Here is a piece of my crime. It is mine to give you. You only get what I allow you to have." Think about the intimacy of the act. Murder is a violation, but this went a step further. He didn't just take Paul Stine's life, he took a piece of his identity. A shirt is a personal item. It's something you wear against your skin. By cutting a piece of it away, the Zodiac was committing a post-mortem violation. He was asserting his ownership over the victim even in death. He was saying, he belonged to me. I had the power of life and death over him, and to prove it, I took a piece of him home with me. This made the crime incredibly personal and terrifying for the public. The killer wasn't just a distant figure who shot people. He was someone who touched his victims, who lingered at the scene, who took trophies. It created a tangible link between the monster and his work, and it made everyone feel more vulnerable. He wasn't just out there, he might have a piece of his last victim in his pocket. And finally, it was the ultimate taunt. This is perhaps the most important layer. He knew the police had been close, he knew they had talked to him. Sending the shirt piece was his way of rubbing their faces in their failure. It wasn't just, "I killed him," it was, "I killed him, and you fools let me walk away with a piece of his bloody shirt in my hand." It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated ego. He was so confident, so arrogant, that he wasn't afraid to provide the police with physical evidence connecting him to the crime. Because he believed they would never, ever catch him. The shirt piece was a symbol of his invincibility. It was a trophy from his greatest victory, a victory not just over Paul Stine, but over the entire San Francisco Police Department. He wasn't done with the shirt, he knew what a powerful symbol it had become. In later letters, he sent more pieces. He sent a second piece, threatening to shoot up a school bus full of children. He was using the memory of Paul Stine, the horror of that murder, as leverage. Each new piece of the shirt was a reminder of his power and his cruelty. It was a way of reopening the wound, of keeping the fear fresh. He was branding his terror with this single grisly artifact. He was a master of psychological warfare, and Paul Stine's shirt was his most effective weapon. The act of sending the shirt piece defined the Zodiac. It's what separated him from other serial killers. Many killers take trophies. They keep wallets, jewelry, or other personal items from their victim. But they keep them for themselves. They are private mementos of their crimes. The Zodiac took a trophy not to keep, but to share. He wanted the world to see it. His fulfillment didn't come from the private act of possession. It came from the public act of revelation. He needed an audience, he craved the attention, the fear, the headlines. The murder was just the first act. The communication, the taunting, the game playing, that was the main event. Without the shirt piece, the Stine murder would have been another tragic crime, perhaps linked to Zodiac by the letter's details. But the fabric made it legendary. It created an image in the public mind, the killer in the dark, with his knife, carefully, calmly cutting a square from a dead man's shirt, the city lights reflecting in the cab's windows. It was an act of such cold, calculated audacity that it almost defied belief. So, why did he send it? He sent it because it was the perfect message. It was proof of his identity, a symbol of his control, an act of intimate violation, and a monument to his ego. It was the ultimate way to say, I am real, I am here, I am smarter than you, and you are powerless to stop me. He was a terrorist, and his weapon wasn't just a gun or a knife, but fear itself. The bloody piece of Paul Stine's shirt was the purest distillation of that fear. It was a small piece of cloth that told a giant story of power, arrogance, and terror. It was his masterpiece. It was, for him and for the history of crime, the ultimate proof. And the most terrifying part is that he was right. They never did catch him. He got away with it all. And that small piece of fabric remains a testament to the monster who played a game with the city and won. It sits in an evidence locker, a silent witness to a killer's ultimate act of defiance.